Jet ski's finally back. It's late o'clock and I've got 5 days to get this thing on the water. This has been sitting somewhere in some grass all winter long. So there's gonna be a ton of spiders under that cover and I'm not looking forward to it. What Mr. Ray and I are doing today is we gotta try to pull the motor and get the motor back in within 5 days, which is not gonna be very easy. After much caution due to severe arachnophobia, we were able to get the cover off. And yeah, there were a couple of spiders, but we got them. We're good. So now it's time to open up that engine compartment. Alright, there the motor is again. There, that somewhere down there is that drive shaft seal. That's got to be replaced because water's coming in through it. And somewhere down there is the trim control motor, which I have another one for because that's busted. I'd like to be able to control my trim. First step is to pop the carburetors off, and then get the exhaust manifold off. Label all the bolts. 1.5 hours later, the motor is just about ready to come out. Assemble it all back up, hopefully it doesn't leak and sink this time, and I thank you for your help, Mr. Haircut. Day 2, Monday. And I've got until about Friday to finish this thing. Saturday is Memorial Day weekend, Monday's Memorial Day, and I'd love to get this on the lake by then. So now I just got to remove this jet pump nozzle and then the jet pump itself. And I think I've got to remove this plate, I can't quite remember. Then once that comes out, I can pull the drive shaft away from the motor and lift the motor out. And then I used to have a table there. I don't anymore, so I'm not sure where I'm going to put that motor. Jet pump's loose. I think that hose is to feed the water motor. That kind of kinked up braided hose there. So I'm going to look into replacing that. So I'm going to push that drive shaft more towards the back here and then see if the motor's free. Motor's out. There it is. I'm out of breath. I certainly do not recommend taking a motor out by yourself. It's heavy. I didn't really have a place to put it, so I ended up kind of resting it up the top there, a little bit there. I've had to switch to my phone for the rest of this part, because my 70D is giving me some issues with the SD card. I took the trim motor box apart. I think I know why that motor has failed. It's pretty bad. Those things down there were snapped off on the motor, which probably allowed quite a lot of water to get in, or the motor housing rather, and that motor failed. And I wouldn't be surprised if the smart trim control, or CATS, Kawasaki automatic trim control system, or whatever it is, wouldn't be surprised if that's dead. And I don't really need that too much, as long as I can raise and lower the trim just by this button here. And I also took off that drive shaft seal. That wasn't that bad of a task. There's a drive shaft, doesn't look too bad. There's some obvious wear where the bearing was sitting and such. And here's the old housing and seal. This is it's pretty gross. Bearing's very loose. The seal here, which is hard to see, is quite shot, so I'm sure that's where most of the water was coming in. And it wouldn't be a bad idea when I go to put the new one on to put a lot of Celastic around the outside here and make sure that's perfectly sealed off and cured before I go in the water. I think this hose too, which goes to the underside of the exhaust manifold, the clamp wasn't tight on that, so I wouldn't be surprised also if that was dripping some water in here. I'm gonna reseal that there at that expansion tube, or whatever you want to call that, and then reseal a couple of hoses under there to make sure that's a watertight seal. Pretty much going to do it for tonight's section. It's going to go and get cleaned up. Got a lot of schmoo on my hands and such. Get the bike back in the garage and then wait for parts. I've ordered a couple more parts. I got all new gaskets coming in for the installation part because I don't really trust the old gaskets the way that they are. So, I mean, they're not really that old, but when you take off gaskets, especially for a 2-stroke carbureted motor, if you have a bad seal between the carburetor and this intake manifold here, you could have a runaway condition, which isn't the most fun on the water. Pretty much anywhere, come to think of it. Alright, so tomorrow's another day and I'll get those seals on and take care of that mess. We'll see what happens. Are you a hungry cat? It's Wednesday, so technically day 3 of me working on it because I didn't get to work on it yesterday, which was Tuesday. And Saturday's coming up real fast, and the motor is still not in the jet ski, and that seal isn't done, so I've got to scrape some more of the old gasket stuff off of there. And that whole mess, I got to tackle that. I got to figure out how I'm going to clean all that corrosion out. And then I got some epoxy to reseal those broken clips down there, so I can get that thing nice and watertight, because I'm hoping no water comes into the jet ski when it's all buttoned up, but I really don't want the new motor housing or the new motor to get screwed if water does happen to enter and get into that housing. I think I know why the old trim motor wasn't working. It's pretty rusted through. That's the new one here. Definitely looks a lot better. I'm only concerned that the wiring inside there got a little destroyed. I fixed up some of the broken connections with some new butt splices and some electrical tape. I also was able to use some epoxy to get those two connections there secured back into the housing. And I'm going to do something I don't really like doing, putting some silicone right at the wires on the inside and kind of plugging that up to make sure no water can pass through there. Which, if I ever have to replace those wires, that's going to be a pain, but it will ensure nothing leaks through there. I scraped all the junk off of the plate that the drive shaft bearing and the drive shaft bearing holder goes to. Used a bunch of acetone to clean off any surface that silicone's going to go on. That's the old nasty drive shaft bearing. There's a new one, new housing all assembled. You can see this is kind of stretched out to the side there. That's nice and firm. That's the underside here, the side that goes into the hole, or into that plate. That's pretty worn out, and that's pretty nice. I'll be using some marine silicone sealant, which is good for above the water and below the water. You want to make sure when you're sealing this type of stuff you use a sealant that's rated to be below water as well. New drive shaft seals in place, and I realized I really can't test the motor without having the motor, the real motor in, because that's what battery grounds to, and I believe that's all controlled through some of that wiring harness and such. So, I mean, it didn't work before, so worst case scenario is it doesn't work afterwards, I guess. It's getting late here, so I'm gonna wrap it up for the night, and these silicone fumes and acetone fumes are really getting to my head, and same with the epoxy. So I'm gonna come back tomorrow, try to button everything up, kind of get everything back in its place, and then see if I can get that motor back in. And if I can do that, should take maybe the end of Friday before I can start really testing to see if it runs. I mean, it sat over the winter and I don't think there was any water in it, so I don't really anticipate any problems, but you never know. So tomorrow's another day, day 5. Well, technically day number 4 of me working on it, because of that whole previously mentioned lack of work on Tuesday, and I've got a pretty big agenda for tonight. I'm starting this late as usual, so I kind of want to get the motor in tonight, but I still need to clean up that mess, get that motor back in, and seal that motor housing properly. Drive shaft seal's looking great, feels great, all torqued down, so that's the only other thing. And I think I'm going to pull that pipe real quick and try to put some silicone or RTV around the water hose down there. It's not really focusing, but I think you get the point, because I believe there's a slight leak from there. New trim motor's in, and I couldn't fit the steel plate adapter, this piece, in between that motor, which really braces the motor, and it's that motor is a lot bigger than the older one. And I'm not going to say or link which part that was, because I don't even know if this is the correct OEM housing or any of those things, so it's probably not the seller's fault. But that motor is definitely a little bigger and doesn't fit with that plate whatsoever. So in doing so, I snapped one of the pieces of plastic off. I can't really see it down there. It's kind of like one of these tabs there, by torquing it down a little too hard. So I'm hoping it really feels solid, and I'm hoping that stays like that and doesn't cause too much damage, or doesn't just snap the second I go to move the trim, which would really suck. And I put the trim sensor back on, and now I don't have a gasket for this, and this gasket you can clearly see is a little messed up. So I'm going to use silicone, surround it with that, and unfortunately that super strong epoxy broke, so I've got to re-epoxy that, which sucks. I feel like I'm working backwards. It's taken me an hour and a half just to do that, which isn't very good. I still have to get to siliconing around that bit where there's a little bit of a leak, and then really just try to get that motor in So I don't want to be up too late. I'm gonna give myself another hour and see how far I get. Am I gonna finish the jet ski today? Look how much of a mess you made when I vacuumed yesterday. 7 a.m. Saturday. I was really hoping to be done by now, but I really didn't get as much as I wanted to get done last night. I wanted to be finished with the whole thing, since in a couple hours is when I have to go and test this thing. I was able to put the motor back in last night by myself. That wasn't too hard of a task, but it wasn't too easy either. So now I've got to put the motor mounts back in, and then put the carbs back on after that, get the ignition sorted, and then I can go ahead and test it with some water here. I gotta leave in 12 minutes. I'm about to start it up. Got the water hooked up. So far there's no leaks inside, which is good, and I'm gonna hope it stays that way while it's running. I also have to bolt back on this flame arrestor cover, put on a couple zip ties, and then should be good to go.